Hello and welcome to this Conversations That Matter hangout as we're leading up toward our summer break. And it's about time because it's really hot here. Whew. I'm Mark Davenport. I'm here with
Heidi Hörnlein.
Yes. And this series is part of our effort to bring a greater public awareness to truly remarkable people who have experience, knowledge, and especially wisdom to share with us all. And we're winding up this current series in this next of our last talk with a remarkable person, Marco Morelli, who's been around the integral scene for some 15 years, where he famously co-authored Integral Life Practice, after which he struck out on his own path following his art, including his podcast. I'll say that again, podcasts at infiniteconversations.fm. And now he's on his way into his own book of poems, stories, and essays, I thought rather modestly titled, I Am the Singularity. Well, an ongoing concern, and perhaps the overriding topic as we talk today, though, is how to get people who have some idea what the world needs now to work together in collaboration so that something of true worth can happen. But first, a few words from Heidi about how you can engage today as the program unfolds.
Yeah, hello. I want to show you the website, the Wisdom Factory, and there you click on live streaming to comment, because we won't monitor the comments on YouTube. And you can see it also there for sure, you know. There was something I wanted to say. Integral Life Praxis. Marco, I think you have co-authored that too, haven't you? You have worked with Ken Wilber, and I would invite you to tell us a little more about what your past is, because you seem very young, but I think you have done quite a lot already.
Well, sure. Let's start there. Let's start in the past, and then we'll work our way to the present, and maybe then we'll look our way to the future. Yeah. I started. Let's see. Oh, see, the problem is though, if we go one step to the past, I always have to go two steps back, because that next step only makes sense in terms of the prior steps. Yeah. And so I think.
Okay, which step would you like?
Well,
not to make sense.
The best thing to say, or by way of setting a context, would be that when I was a little bit younger, I'm age-wise, I'm older than I look, is what people tell me. But when I was in my teens, going into college, etc., I became seized by a passion for philosophy and literature and the life of the mind and the life of the spirit and the soul. And I began practicing meditation. I began doing yoga. I visited Colorado one time and did a few courses over the summer at Naropa University. Mm-hmm. And I formed this idea, or some kind of idea congealed in my awareness, that I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be some kind of... I admired writers, and I can talk about a few of them. I admired artists, I admired musicians, but most of all, they made me feel something very different than what my reality had been up until that point. And so that was sort of the context in terms of my own development, or what have you, where I encountered Ken Wilber's work and then became very enamored of it. It seemed to explain a lot of things to me. It also, to me, pointed to a higher possibility, or greater possibility of being, and a sense that my life, my awareness could be more, could be bigger, could be more, could just exist in a greater dimensionality, I think is maybe the sense that I had. And so when I found Ken's work, I fell in love with it, and to the point where when I came to a path, a fork in the path of my life, around 27 years old or so, I decided to not take the one road that would have set me down a path of a career and potentially more stability and other things that it promised. And instead, I took the path of moving out to Colorado, where Wilbur at that time was starting an organization called Integral Institute, and seeing if I could get involved in some way. I really didn't have a plan exactly. I didn't know anybody here. I'd never spoken with Ken Wilber before, or the other people who were associated with him. It just sounded like he was doing something really cool and unique and interesting, and of course, like idealistic and sort of world changing. And so that was attractive to me at that time. It was very attractive. So I moved to Colorado.
Was that about 2004 or so?
It was January 7th, 2003, when I moved to Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of a few months, I ended up meeting various individuals who were working with Ken, and in a social space, and just through sending an email here or there, and I ended up meeting him, or being invited to a meeting in his loft and meeting him there. And one thing led to another, but I started working at Integral Institute. And then as part of that work, we were a very fast growing organization. There was a lot of creative energy. It was a chaotic kind of environment, but it was alive. It was really vibrant. And there was a meeting of the minds, I think, and a convergence of energies that occurred there, particularly like even in this geographic area, but it was really people all around the world who were connecting to each other on the basis of a shared interest or passion or curiosity with respect to integral theory and Ken Wilber's work. So that's how I ended up here. And I did an interview or a podcast with John Dupuis a few weeks ago, where I really told the story from a sort of intimate first-person perspective of like how that was for me and what that experience was like, and how I sort of was ejected out of it, or self-ejected into another sort of space. So I'll refer people back to that if they want to hear that story.
Yeah.
I don't want to necessarily tell it again. But
send us the link and we will post it in the website. Okay.
All right, perfect. But the long story short is that because I had a desire and maybe a sort of inkling of an aptitude for writing, and a sensibility for literary sensibility or poetic sensibility, I got involved with that writing project, and I worked with Terry Patton and Adam Leonard especially in formulating an articulation of an approach to a balanced sort of life oriented around self-development and transcendence and awakening. So the full title of the book was Integral Life Practice, a 21st century blueprint for physical health, emotional clarity, emotional well-being, mental clarity, and spiritual awakening, something like that. Like, it had a very long and multi-dimensional subtitle.
Yeah, we have written it on the website, the whole title, and then also a link. You can click on it, and you go to thewisdomfactory.net/Marco-Morelli, and there you find everything. Okay.
Okay, so Integral Life Practice, for anyone who's not familiar with it, the idea is it's sort of creating your own program of self-improvement is basically, I think, what it is, by sort of looking at all the techniques or paths or methods that traditions have developed over very long periods of time from all different cultures, and putting them together in some sort of customized way that addresses or enhances all those various dimensions of the being. And so that was very amenable to me, because I had always wanted to be healthy. I'd always wanted to be intelligent or educated. I'd always wanted to be clear about just the fundamental matters of reality of that. And I've wanted to work with and experience and allow my emotional life to flourish. Mm-hmm. And especially through the arts, and that sort of idea of integrating those dimensions was attractive, because it kind of offered the possibility, or a sense of the possibility, that one could be whole. One could move fluidly through the various aspects of one's life and not be so compartmentalized or so disjointed or so impaired, by by one's own kind of lacks and needs and unresolved issues in various areas. So, but I moved on from that as well, like you were saying, and part of it was just a desire to do different things creatively that I didn't feel really fit within the framework that Ken had developed and that everyone was working with in terms of aqual integral theory. And that's not it's a wonderful framework and it's a wonderful philosophy. But I found that my own engagement with it, or the way that I related to it, needed to itself evolve. And so, that's when I left and I got married. I had children, had a house. I mean, my whole circumstance changed. And I told this story with John in the last podcast. But the last 10 years, 11 years of my life have been sort of a reintegration at maybe another level of, I don't know. It's hard to talk about levels exactly. That's more of just a sort of very inadequate way of talking about it. But something has been gestating, with me and in me. And more recently, I'm trying to really bring that forth and to connect it with what other people are doing, because I think a lot of other people are going through similar types of growth processes, and they have their own metaphors, they have their own passions, they have their own skills and talents, etc. And I think part of what we wanted to talk about today was how we can interconnect those and kind of synchronize to have a greater effect.
Yep,
yeah, because the experience is that everybody tries to do and do and do and do, but alone we are sort of much weaker, no? Almost impossible to succeed. But when we could reunite the forces which are already there in the world, how powerful could we be?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I came to meet you, because you seemed to have already some ideas about that, and I would like you to tell us a little bit.
Yeah, what's been your experience with putting it together, of actually, finding ways to collaborate? How's that going for you?
Yeah, well, it's hard. It's
Yeah.
very hard. And it's hard also not to get frustrated by the process, because that's really the enemy, is to allow oneself to, well, not to wallow in pity and to wallow in the places where we're more weak. Whereas I think if we see things the right way, or if we kind of shift our perspective, sometimes we can more recognize what we have to work with, like the gifts that we have to work with, which are really profound, actually. And so part of how it's gone for me and how it's going for me has been, on an inner level, a sort of reconciliation with my own relationship with the world and with other people, right? Because we and culturally, I think we are entrained in certain ways. Like, we're entrained to regard ourselves or think of ourselves as really separate, really not connected. And it's not, you can philosophically or ideologically believe in interconnection, or believe in those kinds of, that people that we're all one in unity, consciousness, or what have you. But that's very different from actually implementing that or living that in reality. And I think that there are some really specific type problems like that we need to focus on and if not solve, at least discuss and open up, begin to figure out, that are kind of essential to include in the conversation. So one of them is the economic problem. Part of the reason that we're entrained to be separate and to feel competitive and to feel very distinct is because we all are facing our own survival programming. And we have to be self-seeking. We kind of have to be self-promoting, especially in this sort of noospheric space, in order to succeed, in order to ultimately survive. And so that creates a charge, that creates a real sense of I don't know, like opposition, right? When people are aware, even when they're very friendly, and even when you're sharing an interest in something, there's also often a kind of subtext of competition. Your project, my project, there's money that is involved oftentimes, and many people can't kind of take the time to learn about what others are doing, and to have the conversations that would enable them to coordinate better, because they're so focused just on making money and surviving. Because if you don't, the implicit threat that's enforced by the social order is that you will be ostracized, you will lose the things that you have, you will be punished in some way or the other. So we're all kind of under, I think, and by all I mean like 99%, under the kind of the threat of punishment if we don't comply in some way with the larger systems, economic systems, and social systems.
And if it's not the social system that will punish, it's our own selves who will punish us.
Well, yeah, exactly. We'll find a way to punish and to be punished.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think that looking at the economics of how people collaborate is going to be really important, and is really important. And that's part of how I ended up kind of in this experiment. It's more than an experiment at this point, but it started out in sort of with an experimental, and I think it has still an experimental attitude of creating a cooperative organization. So the reason for that is that, and this co-op is called Cosmos. It's called Cosmos Cooperative. And the reason for that is that I think that we need some kind of vehicle or some kind of node or some kind of structure or mechanism for rethinking and restructuring how money flows and how our sort of economic relations are structured. And we need that on a large scale, obviously. Like, we need that on a global planetary scale. We need that on national, regional, local scales. But we also need it on the scale of our own networks and our own creative relationships. And one of the things that I think has happened, I talked about this with John as well, is that we've gotten used to, in the area of social media and the internet, to doing a lot of work that is creating a lot of value that's not really compensated or recognized.
Yeah. Tell us about it.
And part of the reason for that, there's a couple of things. I mean, one, there's just technology that hasn't quite gotten aligned or coordinated yet. Two, it's because the platforms which have emerged are centralized, extractive, and really are, at one level serving us by providing things like Google Hangouts that allow us to talk, but on the other level, extracting from us by using our mind energy to make enormous profits for very small groups of people. Which, I'm not saying they don't deserve credit for creating a lot of the technologies that we use, but it's become very imbalanced. And I would like to create technologies and create systems that allow people to bring forth their creative and intellectual and spiritual gifts and exercise those capacities and connect them with others and create like bigger things together in a fairer way, just in a fairer way that distributes the ownership and the equity in what is being created according to what people actually put into it. And so there's a long tradition in cooperative institutions of thinking about how to do that. But there's a moment now where with the internet, we can kind of have a sort of 2.0 version of it. Because co-ops are kind of a 19th century sort of structured, and they're not necessarily, if you think of them in those terms, they are not necessarily adequate to 21st century reality, but the principles can be adapted to creating more equitable networks. And so that's kind of that's the problem that I'm working on. But that's sort of one, if we look integrally, that's like one dimension of the problem. Because like you're saying, Mark, there's also the interior dimensions of it. And how we personally have to in some way change ourselves, right, in order to be able to cooperate. Like, we don't necessarily even know how to do that very well.
No, I have done here, I don't know if you know that, the Belbin team test.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, what did I get? a cooperation was quite team worker. I'm a bad team worker, but I'm a very good somebody who makes it perfect and somebody who brings in novelty. So these are my strengths in this text, but not working in a team. Also, I would like to, but
what scale is that?
Well, a team is one way of thinking about cooperation, right? That's like one metaphor for cooperation, because in a team, you're part of one group and that is maybe in opposition to other groups, and you're playing a game of some kind, and you have to have some kind of unity between you and a shared identity. And that, I think, is a metaphor that works for a lot of organizations. And there's something inspiring about that. Like, to be a part of the team is could be attractive and could be powerful. But I think that there are other ways of cooperating that maybe are more friendly to people like you, Heidi, who is maybe not as, who brings maybe a sensibility of the perfectionism, of the novelty. And so it's like to apply some integral theory, right? There's the communion part of it. That's sort of the cooperative. But there's also the agency or the individual part of it, and both are really important. Like, that's a polarity that you can't you can't get rid of, or it's, I don't know how you would really. So
or if you should,
right, exactly. So when the problems change, or the nature of the problems change, if we start thinking of them multidimensionally like that, and that's part of what I'm trying to do, is create spaces that are more focused on different dimensions of the sort of meta problem, and also on different dimensions of some desired outcome. Like, what do we really want to have happen? Like, what would be the point of cooperating or connecting or bringing forth our projects? Why are we doing what we're doing?
Yeah, this is not easy. I have a women's group, and we are still sort of working on what we want to do. The far goal we know, create a better future and something like this. But what is really the intention which brings us together, and what could we really do together? I mean, we work on the internal aspect, we work also on the shadows and things like this, but it's not really clear. And in some way, I think it cannot be clear, because we are going to somewhere where we don't have models. I don't know how you see that, but I think it's like doing steps into the dark. I mean, I've seen, for instance, your website and try to navigate it. It's not easy. So I think also for you is sort of trying out what works, no? And so for all of us, trying out what is best working, and then always adjusting, building the plane while flying, sort of.
Yeah, that's my experience as well, actually, is moving in the direction, like intuitively, of what I want, what I think is good, or what's worth pursuing, or worth moving for, acting for, working for, but also not having a clear idea exactly of how to do it. And part of the reason is it's so complex. If we really start thinking about, I mean, just when you asked me a simple question before about my life biography, it really isn't so simple, because you start peeling away the layers and say, well, why did you do that? Why did that happen? And then what happened before that? And there's all layers. The story is infinite, really, and we can keep going back and back. But I think, at the meta level, right? We are trying to move into something different or something new, and so we have to leave something behind. And we have a sense of where we're going, and we have a way of, like, the forum, the conversations there, or all the conversations you're doing here. There are different sort of trajectories, like ways of like exploring that, like, uncharted or unmapped territory, and bring in some light and clarity to them. Like, we talk about it, and we can connect concepts, and we can connect experiences, and like what you say, and that makes sense to me in certain terms. I reflect back to you, and it mutates in that way. So, but maybe I'm getting too far in the weeds here.
No, I don't think so, because I think especially when you have a group conversation, which is going very deep, the sort of group mind gets out different things than a person alone could do. No, somebody is getting then the idea, but I'm convinced that it's not only their idea, but it's coming out of what has been said and done and been before. So for me, it's very, very important to have these conversations, not only for me to learn, for you probably is similar, but also to get, get into other people's heads, get more opening and more possibility. When I see I'm a new, how was it, somebody who is creating new, from somewhere the new must come, must be downloaded from somewhere. And when we come together and talk, this is a perfect opportunity to create the new.
And usually in a conversation, if we talk for a while, we can come to some understanding that, that something new is coming out. This way we are together is illustrating some process, and to recognize what that process is can be very, very creative and help you move. I'm not sure it's come out yet. Has it?
Not quite. I don't think so. It's just there under the surface, though.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of grazing it, but we may need to kind of dig our fingers in, get a little bit gooey. I get. All right. So one, I think conversations are very important. Right. That is something that's coming out, and the way I've been thinking about it is that conversations are important not so much to solve a particular problem, right? There are some conversations that are focused on solving a problem, discussing solutions, etc. And I'm in the middle of a conversation about conversations right now on the forum at Infinite Conversations, and so I'm reiterating some points that I've made there and points that have been shared with me as well. I'm not claiming ownership or originalness to any of this. I'm sort of just recirculating ideas that have been, coming through other dialogues. But the way that I'm coming to see conversations, like the kind that we're having here, is that there have to be a lot of them, and they have to form a sort of milieu. Like there have to be many people talking to each other in a sort of decentralized way, but with some kind of overall structure or meta understanding that allows perspectives to sort of filter, to be extended. This is coming from another thinker named Albert Murray, to be extended, elaborated, and refined, so that our intuitions, our perspectives, our mutual understanding can go deeper, can kind of unfold, but also that it doesn't just go nowhere. Like it gets taken up into more refined types of conversations, and even conversations that are not just you and I, not just people talking at each other in real time or with each other in real time, but may take place at subtler levels or may take place over different time scales. For example, if the philosopher Jean Gebser described poetry as a history of the dateless. He called it a history of the dateless. I'll say it again, a history of the dateless.
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 No date.
Right.
Okay.
So I was a few minutes late for our call. Our conversation here had to happen at exactly 11 o'clock a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, where I am. But the poetic conversation happens in a different time. And it is a kind of conversation that is not divorced from this conversation or the kind of milieu, but sort of, I think, grows out of it, like tendrils or like offshoots. And you start to have like conversations across time scales. And I'll let you're laughing and smiling, but I think that like having a milieu that would be healthy and sort of in the sort of way that I'm sort of envisioning here would allow other kinds of conversations to happen as well. from the poetic to the very practical. Maybe like we have to solve this user interface issue on the website because people are getting confused when they arrive. So how do we make it less confusing for people? Like that's, but you can't get there until you know what you're doing in the larger sense.
Yeah.
So, all right.
I smiled because it's in some way, it is combined with what I want to say, because it's not only in time, but also in places, because we have live viewers. And one very active one is Roland Takaoka, who, by the way, has created this wonderful comment tool, which we have on our website. And he is writing a lot of comments to, to you. Interesting collaboration as methodology. It is as current a trend as ever, he says. And then he said later, because we were talking on and on, people as a whole are infants in the collaboration concept. We'll be seeing a lot more.
Yep, it's new.
And then conversations here. I don't know what he means, but
well, he does.
Represent the bond, he says.
So, okay, let me see if I can just lob a response to that. I think that part of the reason that people are infants in the conversation space is because we presume our separateness. So our starting point is that we're separate people that have to come together and collaborate. We have to figure out the rules and the relationships to actually make that happen. If the understanding is reversed, and from the beginning we're non-separate, from the beginning we're interbeings or what have you, then collaboration becomes a lot easier because there's less of a. It's not that it's absent. You still have a sense of self, separate self, even and individuality, and it's still very important. Actually, it's much more important. But the presumption, you're not always working against the underlying presumption. Like everyone's on the same team, right? Basically, and we share a common ultimate context. There's no other context, right, other than the one that we commonly share. But we don't know exactly how to talk about it all the time. And of course, we have divergent interpretations, perspectives, framings of it, etc. So part of the reason we talk is to dissolve some of those perceived differences, and also to clarify other real differences or apparently real or truly apparent differences. It gets paradoxical to talk about it because ultimately, if we're in a non-dual space or what's referred to as a non-dual space, then our whole language actually has to arise differently. And that's, I think that we, in terms of the people that I've been interacting with, are often sort of fluttering in between. Like we're not quite there yet, and but we're not either purely like separate in this sort of hyper competitive like capitalist kind of mindset either. Like so that we're done. I think I'm done with that. It's still there and still a part of me. So I'm not really done with it, but I've made a decision at a certain point that I'm done with it. And so part of my inner work is following through on that decision and becoming a champion of or a servant of a different possibility, like a possibility that begins in unity and then from there blossoms into diversity, rather than beginning in just kind of in a nihilistic fragmentation and trying to put all the pieces back together. Like that's just drives you crazy. So thank you for all the comments. What was the commenter's name?
Good job to you.
Okay.
His name is Roland Takaoka from
in California somewhere.
San Francisco, I think.
Anyway, I wanted to say when I joined Google+, it was about 4 years ago, and Roland was one of the people I connected with. And we were about, let's say, 100 people of show hosts, and we were very much connected and collaborated and in exchanging information and everything, and went to each other's shows. And that was really a feeling like being together. Unfortunately, I think it's the fault of Google because they changed everything. Then people went away. And it sort of dissipated, this group. But it was a very lively group of helping each other. It was no strings attached. Nobody wanted to get money from the others, you know. And I love this way of being together. Sure, it comes what you said before, that in some way one has also to live. Maybe we have a little pension or something, so at least we don't die of hunger, you know. But who really has for every for every bite has to work. There is not the time which we invested as Roland and many other people to create this togetherness which we had, and still a little bit.
And that spirit is still inspiring.
Yeah, the still it is.
Really is.
Yeah, still. Yeah.
And there's no money. No.
Yeah, it's a. I struggle with the money question. I don't know exactly how to deal with it, and it's something that I'm experimenting with as well, and something that I want to create a vehicle to experiment with. So one of the things we want to do with Cosmos is to create how to put this, but essentially create our own currency, right? However, do it in a way that starts more in a playful space. That is to say, not in a, like, if you get involved in cryptocurrencies or that kind of a thing, Bitcoin, like, the real point is to people want to, there's a lot of anxiety around it because you want to make money, you want to speculate on the future value of the coin, you want to use it potentially as a alternative to fiat currency, the dollar, the euro, etc. And what I would like to do, I love all that. I'm very interested in that topic, but what I would like to do is see what kind of economy we can create that is more conducive to free-flowing creative relationships of mutual support, kind of like you're describing as the the conversations that you all had in that sort of community of people who are there together, who are helping each other, who are maybe doing their own projects, have their own visions, their own creative passions. I love that. I mean, I really want to be around people who are passionate about what they're interested in. But then to find ways through these currencies, like to support each other in doing it, and to make it more feasible for especially those like myself and many people that I know, and many people of my generation. I think it's a generational thing as well, to make it more feasible. Because so long as we're trapped in the hamster wheel of survival, and doing things that we don't really want to do, or it's not that we don't, whether or not we want to do them, it's that they're not even really necessary, they're not even worth doing. I mean, so many of the jobs that people have to do are not worth doing. But they're being done, or they're a bit because somebody wants to make a lot of money, or because somebody wants private ends. They're not focused on the bigger issue. And the bigger issue is that we have to have a habitable overall space. Like, our overall planet has to be habitable for human and all forms of life. And if we're going to go off into space and do other things, that's great. But we have to do that in an integrative manner. And so I think that focusing on that sort of bigger picture, which relates very profoundly and intimately to our interior life, to our inner work, right? I'd like to have a conversation. Like, I'd like to open a conversation into those spaces, because if we rethink our economics, if we rethink what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we want to do, and what we're called to do, as all of us creative beings in some way or another, then that would be paradise. Like, that would be what a good, I think, a good objective, right? A good desired outcome, a good direction to go in. And I think that many people have a sense that these ideas about paradise, heaven on earth, and all those visionary religious ideas, that we don't have to believe in the mythological version of those. I think we can be practical about that as well, and look at what kind of systems, what qualities in our culture, what are we, how are we called to change our lives, and who are we called to become in order to make that actually practical, so that we don't have these insane situations like that are the nation states and the capitalist economy and the well, I don't want to get too into the weeds in that, but
the question is, how do you create something different? You know, we have always this at the background, and we have to go out of it. We cannot just cut it in pieces and do something completely new. No, it needs to be a sort of a transformation of things. And the visions are fine, but how do we really do that? And how do we inspire people to collaborate, as we have the topic today, to do that too, and that we first find a vision together, at least a reasonable amount of people. You cannot imagine that the people who have voted for a certain person would have the same vision than you have, you know? So we have to find the groups, the subgroups, and first do it there, find agreement, not an agreement, a common vision and an intention, and then be able to maybe let my project fall because I understand that yours is better and I work with yours or something like this, you know? And I think we still have to learn so much us evolved people. So
oh yes, so we evolved ones. But how do we work together, you know, on the micro scale, you know?
It works
the
somehow.
Same principles, actually.
It's one thing, and in hundreds and thousands is another thing.
Yeah, well, we have to cooperate with ourselves first of all, right?
Sure.
And then with those around us, like, so I mean, it's holonic, right? In that way, and I got a little frustrated with myself for a moment because I felt like I was getting too idealistic or too grand. I don't want to lose that sense of a grand vision.
Yes.
At the same time, I'm keenly sort of aware that it can make anyone sound sort of naive and ungrounded, and the practical parts of it are real. So I think it's important to pay attention to things like our technology and things like how the media or the actual media, that which is in between us, allows us to be with each other, right? Because we're interfacing right now through this, right? And there are all these micro type of aspects to all of that, and they cumulatively affect not just our experience, but then our ability to have conversations that matter and conversations that clarify like what the path is, what's the roadmap from where we are now to that larger vision, and which will always be in some way transcendent, right? But
yeah, what I hear you say is very much in the outer quadrant. And I think, and he brought it to my mind again, and because we have to learn to collaborate. I'm in third marriage, he's in fourth marriage. And it is really difficult to live together in a good way. And we are learning that. And my conviction is, how can we come together as one if we in the intimate relationships have not yet learned how to be together, when there are so many single people, so many divorced people that no way to be together anymore and take a commitment to be together and figure out how things could be working well. So how do we think that we can do it with, I don't know how many people all around? So I always want to go back to the individual and our abilities to really be together in a positive way, which is not so easy, and it's not so clear that we can do it.
Well, yeah. I guess we want to be. No, we'll. I mean, it's just any. I mean, I guess one of the problems we have is in language, because in language we always have opposites, and it's impossible to say one thing without at the same time surreptitiously stating the opposite. So when we talk about being together, I immediately think, oh, but I also want to be alone. So I do want to be together, but I want to be together in a way that lets me be alone when I need to be, or as much as I wish to be. And there's something about the spaciousness. Like in solitude, we have a spaciousness that in our togetherness often is not afforded to us. And so how can we be alone in ways that are a communion with others, and how can we be with others in a way that lets us be alone? And at a certain point, it becomes just a sort of tautology or some sort of feudal dialectic, and we can dissolve the linguistic constraints. But it does, I think, speak to sort of the subtleties involved, because there might be a reason. There might be a reason why there's been so much disintegration in the bonds between people, and there may be something to learn from our experiences of alienation and the whole modern phenomena of the isolated subject. As horrific as those lessons might be, like if you tied those, or that philosophy and that outlook to all the horrors of the 20th century, genocides, war. I mean, if you trace it back to that, maybe it's just a mistake. Maybe it's just ignorance and foolishness. But perhaps there's something also to learn from just observing, like, what results from that particular way of thinking, or that particular way of constructing reality.
Well, I like Jeff Saltzman's quote here that evolution may be beautiful, but it's not pretty.
Yeah.
And goodness, I think this is horrible to say this, but there's truth in this, that the horrors of the 20th century is why we can talk like this now.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have bothered inventing these ways of getting close to people without the horrors of the consequences of not doing that.
But we have to take care that it doesn't be repeated.
That's right.
And this is the other thing. What I was saying, it's not that it is bad to be alone or something like this, absolutely not. I was more speaking about the skills we need to be together, if you have your alone time or not. When you are together, you are in the same, let's say, we space, even if you are 3 months somewhere else or something like this. How do you keep the connection? How do you communicate with each other so that this is how can I say, a positive connection between the people? And I think we have to learn that. We don't know it as humanity. And this would be on the left-hand quadrants, a big learning curve. How are we really open to each other? How are we trustful? But also have the borders, the boundaries, well-established boundaries. How do we engage with each other without without agenda? How can we be together in a way which is fostering each other and everybody and the community together, which doesn't mean that you can stay alone for 3 years or not. That's not the point. It's the point how as humans we are able to connect. We have the capacities. We need to develop the capacities for deep connection. And we sometimes have it as state experience, when we do nice exercises and so on, and you feel so connected, and then sort of dissolves, And I think part of the conversations, especially when we do it with people more often, is to deepen these state experiences and get a taste of what it could be to be really connected.
Yeah. Well, I would say, two things. One is that I want to point out, I'm reading this. We're in the middle of a reading group on infinite conversations, and we're reading a book by the philosopher Peter Sloterdijk called Bubbles. And I think we're going to read, it's part of a trilogy. I think we're going to read all 3 of the books the overall volume is called Spheres. And the idea of a sphere is it's basically a we space. It's a space of mutuality or a space of interbeing. And you could imagine spheres within spheres within spheres. In this book, he starts in the intimate sphere, actually the ultra intimate, the infant with the mother, or the infant inside of the mother's womb, as being our first sphere. Yeah. And in the chapter we just read, that we discussed last night, he introduces a phrase called technologies of loneliness. I'll repeat that. Technologies of loneliness. And
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's bringing this from another theorist, and we didn't talk about it last night, but it came to mind in what you were just saying, Heidi, about how do we preserve that aloneness at the same time as communion? How do we have autonomy in communion? He didn't say too much about it, but the couple of things he said were involved like our reading and our communications like this. Like these are ways that we, in a way, deepen our loneliness and at the same time connect it to others, right? Because when I read a book like Spheres or a novel, another book we read recently in the book groups is a book called Shantaram by an author named Gregory David Roberts, and this is a novel. And we would read the book alone, right? And in that reading, we're performing this virtual sort of act of world creation that allows us to commune with our own experiences of the text and our own sort of inner phantasmagoria or inner fantasia, and those that the novelist or the writer has created for us through the medium of language. But then we come together out of those individual interior and alone spaces into a communal space, and kind of like share what we've each sort of learned or what we've each experienced from our solitary experiences, and just in a space like this, like on a hangout, and then that conversation, like everything that spills out through that process, goes on to inform our reading later on. So as we go on to the next chapter, as we read some other article or book or what have you, so I think that that literacy, in the sort of deeper sense of that word, is an important component to it, because literacy is what allows us to be alone with thought, with our thoughts, but it's also what allows us to commune with the thoughts of others, and to begin to learn how to read each other, I think is part of what books can teach us, and part of what the practice of reading, and in particular is this kind of communal practice, the sort of alone togetherness of reading together. It begins to train us, I think, and this is emergent. Like I'm just learning this through the process of doing it, because we've done 4 or 5 book groups, reading groups, and
it's okay. You're with friends. It's fine.
All right. So each conversation is different. I make mistakes. I see what happens. People come and go, but what I'm starting to see happen is that part of what we're learning how to do is to become better readers. And we sort of have to now read in this transmedia scape, where it's not just me and the text, but it's me and the text and you and the hangout, and it all sort of bleeds into each other. All the facets bleed into one another. I'm finding it very enriching and fulfilling, actually, and pleasurable. I'll add. I enjoy it. And when it sort of happens well, and you get in sync, and you start to understand what other people are feeling and how they're seeing the world, and they start to get you, and you can feel that they are getting you, and vice versa. Like it's priceless. It's priceless, and it gives a reason. I think it gives a reason for coming back, for doing it again.
Yeah, it is a little bit like we are doing here, but not with such a basis. When you have a basis as a text or a film or something, you have already digested it for yourself, at least it's good that you have.
You
and
have
then
some digestion, yes.
by formulating it becomes more real for you, and then you can compare it with what the others say, and then you can form your interpretation on what that might not be one interpretation, but another perspective on it. And so you might end up with 3 or 4 different interpretations of what is happening, but it is opening the mind. I think it's a great idea to have something to talk about, let's say. We have only a title to talk about, and there you have a whole text.
Well, this is sort of free jazz, and that's more focused, I suppose. But certainly, I mean, if we just talked amongst ourselves, we would be limited by what we have access to, and what an author does, or an artist does, especially a great one or a very good one, is they introduce new material into that flow.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so to have, I mean, to me, I think it's just a good habit and a good practice to be introducing new ideas into a space, any kind of communal space, not to become stuck in one framework, in one author, in one point of view. And so that's just important for creativity. It's important for resilience. And it's important for enjoyment as well, because novelty is part of what we enjoy. Part of what delights us is something, a novel combination, surprises, and it releases tensions. So, so having a text or a movie or some object, I kind of look at it also like a prism, because the light of consciousness shines through it and refracts in different ways, and so you are able to see different things. Yeah. And if we shine a light through a particular object, like a text, we'll get a different pattern, and we'll see reality differently. So that has been a great. I've loved doing those experiments, and I've loved talking to people about it.
It's a nice metaphor.
Yeah. Yes. The question, as we are coming to the end of the hour, do you already know what book you will propose next? Because it's difficult to jump into a book which you have already done halfway through. So if people are interested, and tell them also where to go and what to do and whatever.
Okay. Well, let me paint a big picture, very broad. So in this imaginary universe that I'm kind of creating with a bunch of friends, let's just call it the cosmosphere. It's just kind of a big container. And then within this cosmosphere, we have multiple projects. And one of those projects is, as you mentioned, the podcast, Infinite Conversations. There's also a forum at infiniteconversations.com. And that's meant to be a platform for dialogue, back and forth, etc. There's also a journal called Metapsychosis, and this is a journal of consciousness, literature, and art, where we publish edited pieces of work, mainly literary or philosophical, text-based, but also films, audio. We're open to different media, and then as part of that journal, Metapsychosis, I propose that we incorporate these book reading groups. I called it Readers Underground. The idea of the Readers Underground wasn't that we would just have one book that everybody's reading at the same time. Ultimately, I would like it to be more distributed than that. I would like us to have the means, and I don't think technologically we're quite there. Like, the process is not clear enough yet, how we do this. And part of it is just because I need more help, honestly. Like, I need people to help coordinate, help publish things, help make things happen. But I would like to create a space where anyone who's a part of it and has an interest in exploring a subject matter, reading a particular book, reading a particular author, and doing that with others, can find them and use the tools that we have, the forum and the hangouts and the publishing, to have the conversations that they feel are worth having. And then for those conversations to become a public resource, where I may not have read that book, but I may notice something that you're saying in the course of your conversation and learn something from that. It may connect to some other book that another group is reading. And we have a certain amount of transparency between groups so that there's a learning process happening on a wider scale. And it's not just coming from me, it's coming from the people who are participating. So the Reader's Underground, I think if you go to infiniteconversations.com, there's categories. It's a forum, so there's categories. I call them channels. And you'll scroll down and see a channel for the Reader's Underground. And if you're reading this, and I mean, we're gonna, I think, continue reading Bubbles, and I will probably not this summer, but in the fall, pick up another book to read. I think there's various proposals, but it doesn't have to be me who decides the books. I would like people to bring their suggestions and to see if they find others who connect. I mean, really, you just need one or two people to have a good conversation. You don't need hundreds of people to be reading the book with you. I mean, that's something I've learned as well. Is I wanted to do big things, but I've found that the better conversations are smaller groups, and that you can kind of bounce ideas. Everybody has a chance to listen and to speak, and it's more like a jazz ensemble than like a big orchestra. So if we can have many jazz ensembles reading different books in different genres, different topics, and then cross-pollinating, that would be my vision for the Reader's Underground. So I don't want to suggest a book necessarily. I want to follow through on the ones that we've started, but also open the space for others to come in and to propose their own. And then if you ask me, well, how can I do it? Then that will force me to actually write it down, and to clarify the actual like step by step. 1, go to this link. 2, whatever.
Consider yourself forced.
Yes. That's right. Okay. Or to suggest somebody else do it, because that's the other thing I would like to see is that there's more of a sort of people seeing things that they like that need to be done, that they would like to see happen, and then just doing it. Let's say, all right, how can we do it? I've been doing it for a while. You can ask me questions. I'll be as helpful as I can. But I would like to create a larger structure that doesn't depend on me, because I want to be a participant. I want to be as deeply as I can into the reading, into my own writing, into the conversations themselves. And we have to create the infrastructure first. But ultimately, I hope that it is really a kind of a thriving space with many different kinds of experiments going on, and with those sort of leading to deep, just a broader effects. Broader effects that can be replicated by other groups, that can be influential in subterranean ways, rhizomatic ways. I don't want to be so idealistic to say that that we're going to change the world or something like that, but I want to have an effect anyway. I want to send out the ripples that are stimulating in that direction, and I want to do that with some clarity and force.
Roland, as the last word said, idealism is important. Someone brings the higher vision, and that seems to be really you at the moment. And we just hope that people who are listening now live or later in replay, that they get the impulse and the little kick and join you there.
Yeah.
We have the links all posted on the website. You have named it several times: Cosmos Co-op and Infinite Conversations.
So go to cosmos.coop, infiniteconversations.com. And I'm going to drop one little hint too. I'm working on what will become a kind of collective blogging platform as well. I mentioned metapsychosis and how those are edited, curated pieces, but pretty soon, if all goes well, I don't want to make any concrete specific promises, but we'll have a platform where people can sort of do their own writing without editing by anybody else, and put it forward for others to share. I mean, just like people have always had blogs, there are a lot of blogging platforms out there, but this one will be for this particular community, and it will share broadly the desired outcomes that those that we share, that we insofar as we've discussed and clarified them, because That's,
what are we sharing anyway?
That's perhaps something we can go deeper into in another conversation.
Yeah. So Marco, we are glad that you made it. You thought it is an hour later, and so you had to run. And I fear we have lost a little bit of people because we started 15 minutes later. But I hope they come back and see you in replay.
Yeah.
So. Yep. And thank you to Roland, the only one who showed up in the comments. I noticed that people often are here because you can see it, but they don't comment. They just, we are still a community, a society of consumers, you know, and the engagement factor is unfortunately not so big. But I have to say, only when I entered into the Google Plus community 4 years ago, I began to learn about the importance of writing comments and of engaging and not just reading and go away, but at least plussing or liking at least, but better write something. How important that is to bring out the ideas of other people, and you hope that others do it with you. So this is an appel to people. When you read a call, okay, when you read something or see something, plus it, like it, subscribe to it, to the websites, to YouTube channels, whatever there is, do it. It helps us, not only us, everybody. Whenever you like the content, make it clear to the creators of the content that you liked it, because you know, as you heard, we don't get money for it, and it seems to be an epidemic of people who are working just because they find it necessary. And we really would like to have a sort of a feedback. When you like it, like it.
Yep. Feedback, recognition.
Yeah. And if you don't like it, you can also say criticism. You can say why you don't like it and what you don't like it. It helps us to go ahead. I say us, and I include you, Marco, and I include all other people who are working like we do. We need the feedback. Just come out of the consumer mentality and come into engagement, into conversation, into connection. And this was the topic of today.
Yeah.
So,
well put.
Yes, it's so easy to just click. Be done. Yeah.
And we will click just now. We give you, Marco, the last moment to wrap it up, or let's say one sentence of the most important thing which you haven't said yet.
Let's take another breath. Yeah.
Okay. So
I'll just say that I thank you, and I appreciate you having me on your show. And I hope that this is only the first of many conversations to come.
All right.
I hope so. Thank you very much. And thank you, Roland, and all the others who were here and will be here.
Yeah.
And bye-bye. Till next week.
Bye-bye.